One of the charges that Socrates is brought to court on in the Apology is the charge that he turns the weaker argument into the stronger. In other words, he makes bad arguments look good. In this video, we're going to take a look at one of his arguments. We're going to put it in standard form and we're going to evaluate it and see, is it a good argument, or has Socrates pulled a trick on us and turned the weaker argument into the stronger? So this is a zoom in on Socrates' arguments. The argument that we'll be looking at appears about halfway through the text. Socrates here is defending himself from the charge that he corrupts the youth. So there's a couple arguments here. There's a main argument and a sub-argument, but I take the main argument to be in this highlighted passage. But either I do not corrupt them, or I corrupt them unintentionally. So that on either view of the case you lie. If my offense is unintentional, the law has no cognizance of unintentional offenses. You ought to have taken me privately and warned and admonished me. For if I had been better advised, I should have left off doing what I only did unintentionally. No doubt I should, whereas you hated to converse with me and teach me, but you indicted me in this court, which is a place not of instruction, but of punishment. So I take Socrates' argument to be for the conclusion that he should not be punished for corrupting the youth. So I'll show you what I did with the main argument, then we'll look at the sub-argument as well. So I take him to be setting up a dilemma, what's called a constructive dilemma, and it goes like this. If I'm corrupting the youth unintentionally, then I deserve correction and education about how I'm doing wrong and how I might be better. And if I'm not corrupting them, then I don't deserve punishment or correction at all. In fact, I shouldn't be brought before the court, right? Either I'm corrupting the youth unintentionally, so not on purpose, or I'm not corrupting them. Therefore, I deserve correction or education, or to be taken aside privately, or I don't deserve punishment or correction at all. All right, so let's take a look at, there are two questions we have to ask ourselves when we're evaluating arguments. The first question is, if these premises were true, would they give us enough reason to believe the conclusion? The second question we need to ask ourselves is, are these premises in fact true? So let's start with that first question. If these premises are true, would they give us enough reason to believe the conclusion? To answer that question, we'll have to look at the form of this argument, and we'll come back to this particular instance of the form. So the form of the argument is this. It's called a constructive dilemma. It says if we generalize, if A, then C, and if B, then D. Either A or B, so one of the if parts are true, therefore C or D, so one of the then parts is true. So if A, then C, and A is a possibility, and if B, then D, and B is a possibility, but it's either A or B, so one of C or D will be the case. Now that can sound really abstract, so let's make a concrete argument here. Think about the 2016 election. Somebody could say, if we elect Hillary, then we'll get a corporate shill for a president. To support that, you could think about the talk she gave, private talks to bankers that she got paid a whole bunch of money for. And if we elect Trump, then we'll get a crook. To support that, you can think about all sorts of things he did, but one of them is Trump University, where he was stealing money from college students and had to pay $25 million in damages. So if we elect Hillary, then we get a corporate shill for a president, and if we elect Trump, then we'll get a crook. When it came down to the primary election, or the main election, it was either Hillary or Trump. So we'll elect either Hillary or Trump, therefore we'll either get a corporate shill or we'll get a crook. This argument that Socrates gives has the same form And it's a good form. It's what we call a valid argument form. If those premises are true, then they would guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So now we see, if the premises are true, they would guarantee the truth of the conclusion, but we have to ask the further question, are the premises in fact true? So first, is it true that if he's corrupting the youth, then he deserves correction and education instead of punishment? Well, that seems right. If somebody's doing something wrong, but it's completely unintentionally and they don't know they're doing the harm, then unless it was a very bad offense, then probably what you should do is teach the person how they're doing wrong and how they might go about doing right. So that part seems right. How about the second part? If I'm not corrupting them, then I don't deserve punishment or correction. That also seems right. If we focus on this particular charge, if he's not guilty of it, well then yeah, he doesn't deserve punishment for this charge. So how about the second premise? Either I'm corrupting the youth unintentionally, or I'm not corrupting them. Well, if we were just to look at this main argument by itself, we would see that this second premise leaves out a possibility. Socrates could be corrupting the youth intentionally, and of course that's actually what the charge is. So we'll need to look at a sub-argument in which Socrates proves that he's not corrupting the youth intentionally. So we can't evaluate the truth of this premise directly without evaluating the sub-argument that leads to this conclusion. Luckily, Socrates does have a sub-argument. He says, if I'm corrupting the youth intentionally, then I'm risking harm to myself. Why might he be risking harm to himself? Well, if he's corrupting people in their democracy, they might turn around and do harm to him. He says, I would not risk harm to myself. Why? Because no one intentionally risks harm to themselves. Therefore, I'm not corrupting the youth intentionally. Now again, with this sub-argument, to evaluate it, we have to go through the two steps. If the premises were true, would they give enough support to the conclusion? And second, are the premises in fact true? So first, if they were true, would they give enough support for the conclusion? Again, we have to look at the form of the argument. So the form of this argument is what we call modus tollens. So that says the general form is if A, then B, not B, therefore not A. Now, when looking at this form, it might not be clear that it's a valid argument form, even though it is. So let's fill it in, give it a concrete instance of this to demonstrate it. So here's, if we fill in A and B with these terms, it makes sense. If I have $5, then I have at least $4. I do not have at least $4. Therefore, I can't have $5, right? And this makes sense. In order to have $5, you have to have at least 4. If you don't have at least 4, there's no way that you can have 5. So again, if these premises are true, they would guarantee the truth of the conclusion. But are the premises in fact true? So first, if I'm corrupting the youth intentionally, then I'm risking harm to myself. That seems right if you're making the people evil around you, that evil might be revisited on you, something like some kind of karmic principle, right? Although it might not be true in every instance, it seems true as a general rule of thumb, right? Now, second, I would not risk harm to myself because no one intentionally risks harm to themselves. Now, what are we to say about this premise? I'm not sure. I mean, on a surface reading, there are plenty of people who risk harm to themselves, right? So there are people who go skydiving, risking great harm to themselves. There are people who now go out into the world, and going out into the world, you risk harm to yourself. Not clear that this premise is true. So what kind of is there any reading available to us that this premise might make more sense? Well, maybe what Socrates has in mind is like sort of an all things considered judgment about what you're doing. Like those people who are going skydiving, they are risking harm to themselves, but they think the benefit will be greater. And maybe maybe people do risk harm to themselves, but they only do it if they think there'll be a benefit that offsets it, right? So maybe what Socrates has in mind here is no one risks harm to themselves unless they think there's some benefit that would offset it. Well, then that sort of begs the question, well, would corrupting the youth provide Socrates with a benefit that might outweigh the risk he has of having evil revisited on himself? So what benefit does Socrates get from conversing with people, conversing with the youth? He says later in the dialogue, he points out he doesn't take any money for his services, and he doesn't hold a high political office. So it's not like he's getting money or prestige, which would offset the risk of the harm to himself here. So what should we say about the premise, considering those facts, that that there's no offsetting good that he would be risking harm to himself to bring about? Well, then I think on that reading, the premise seems plausible, right? Now, it's certainly not uncontroversial. There are many arguments through the course of the Apology where if you hold them under a microscope, they're not uncontroversially true, and Socrates' interlocutor, Modus, is probably too quick to agree to things. He kind of gets steamrolled by Socrates. But we don't want to get steamrolled by Socrates, right? We want to be able to do the sort of thing he does, which is evaluate arguments, asking hard questions about them, right? All right, anyways, about this sub-argument, I think we come to the conclusion that it's not uncontroversially a good argument, but considering other facts about the case, the premises are probably true, and if they were true, they would guarantee the conclusion, so it's probably a good argument. And if that's a good argument, then it seems so he's not corrupting the youth intentionally. So the other options would be he's doing it unintentionally, or he's not doing it at all. And then the main argument covers that. If he's doing it unintentionally, he deserves education and instruction about how he might fix himself and do good in the world. And if he's not doing it at all, then he doesn't deserve to be dragged before court on this charge. So, although on initial inspection, it seems that this argument has seemingly big holes as far as the truth of the second premise and correspondingly the truth of the premise and the sub-argument, on closer inspection of the case, it seems that it's a pretty good argument. All right, so this form of argument, this constructive dilemma, I want you to be on the lookout for it, because there's another example of the constructive dilemma later in the text. Socrates gives an argument that his death will not be bad for him. And I'm going to say that the best way to characterize that argument is as a constructive dilemma. And part of your assignment this week will be to look at that argument that his death will not be bad for him and represent that argument as a constructive dilemma with this form. But that will be part of our discussion board task. Before we get to that, we have a couple quiz questions that you'll have to answer. So, quiz question 1. Which type of argument is the following? If I'm corrupting the youth intentionally, then I'd be risking harm to myself. I would not risk harm to myself. Therefore, I'm not corrupting the youth intentionally. Is that a modus ponens, a modus tollens, or a prediction? Write the question and your answer down, A, B, or C, so when you open the quiz, you can select the correct answer. Quiz question 2. True or false? All of Socrates' arguments in the Apology are uncontroversially sound or cogent, which is to say uncontroversially good. Is that true or false? All right, thanks for sticking around for this zoom in on Socrates' arguments. I'll see you in my next video, in which we'll take a look at Socratic virtue. Thank you.